Week one of med school is finally over, and I can tell you that material is still slowly starting to creep up into me, and I already feel very behind. So this weekend is definitely going to be a catch-up weekend. But today I wanted to really show you something that was really interesting to me. I did learn it in the past, but this is the first time I've actually seen it in a cadaver. The brachial plexus, an amazing piece of architecture from nature that's a mismatch of a bunch of different nerves. Seeing it on a cadaver was really incredible because you always read about it in textbooks. It's like, oh, it's just like a bunch of nerves coming together and stuff. But actually seeing it and seeing those white tubes go straight into the arm muscles, that was crazy. So I really wanted to dive deep into the brachial plexus because it's something that a lot of people go in really nervous about. But I learned a way that would make it pretty easy to determine like where the nerves go and stuff. So with that, please do like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. And let's get right into the video about the brachial plexus. The brachial plexus, probably one of the more difficult plexuses to memorize in anatomy. And this plexus, which is basically a network of veins, come together and mix together in this upper part right here, just above the clavicle. And they project nerves into the different parts of the arm, the forearm, and a little bit of the muscles in the shoulder. They also project into the hand and the phalanges, the wrist area as well. But today I'm just going to focus on the arm. So the plexus is actually made up of multiple different ventral rami. The ventral rami come from the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves separate into dorsal and ventral rami. The ventral rami, they consist of 5 different ones, and they actually start from C5, 6, 7, 8, and T1. C8, remember, it doesn't have a corresponding vertebrae. There's only 7 cervical vertebrae and 1 thoracic vertebrae. That's the thoracic vertebrae is here, T1. But remember, in between C7 and T1, there is the change in how the numbers are relayed because of that extra cervical vertebrae. So my suggestion here is to actually use 5 different colors when you draw out the brachial plexus. This is because the brachial plexus consists of 5 ventral rami, and you can actually tell the paths of each of the nerves as they travel through the plexus. And this will help you understand where the terminal branches are coming from, and if there was like a damage to a specific nerve, you can trace that back and you can figure out, okay, this is where the damage is coming from. So that's what I have here. I have 5 different colors over here: red, white, blue, green, and gray. And we'll use those to designate the different nerves that travel through the brachial plexus. So let's start out here. So I have the vertebrae labeled right here, C4, 5, 6, 7, and T1. And we can actually just start drawing the nerves here. So between C4 and C5, there's one right there. C5 and C6 has one. 6 and 7. 7 and 8. And below T1. Now, if you know the names of these nerves, you're well ahead, but we'll write them out as well. So this is actually nerves C5, this is C6, this is C7, there's C8, and last but not least, T1. Now, the easy way I like to think about this is that these top 2 and the bottom 2 come together, and the middle one's kind of lonely. The middle one's actually fairly lonely throughout, but it stays on a fairly straight path the entire plexus. But we can start off with combining the top 2. Like so. And we can also go with combining the bottom 2. And you'll notice that I am still keeping the colors separate even though they are coming together, because in the actual plexus the nerve fibers are just running together. They're not actually, the neuron axons and the dendrites aren't like coming together. They're not fusing, they're just running together. And then the C7 one stays like that. And this is actually a good point to talk about the divisions of the brachial plexus. Each part of the brachial plexus has a name, and we can actually start by knowing, we already know what these are called. These are called the ventral rami. But as we get to over here, where we started combining over here, these are actually called trunks. So these are the trunks of the brachial plexus, and we can actually label these trunks. So this top trunk, as it is called, is the superior trunk. This middle trunk is namely called the middle, and the bottom one is called the inferior trunk. Hopefully that's making sense so far. And now this is where things get a little bit more fun. So as each nerve fiber bundle is going through, they actually all separate into anterior and posterior divisions. That's actually the next part right here. So what you can do is each color goes up and down. So since the superior trunk is already up, we're just going to leave the line going straight right here. But the superior also goes down like this. Same thing with this white one, which comes from C6, that goes across, but that also travels down with C5's fibers. Just like that. Same thing happens with the middle. There's an anterior and posterior division. Let's go with the anterior first, which goes up, combines over here. And we have the posterior, which, as I said before, continues in a straight line, this main branch. And finally, we have the bottom here. So this green goes up, combines with this main branch here, and also goes straight. And this gray one also follows the green. Pretty colors. So what we have here now are actually called divisions. The divisions here are the borders of the, let's just spread this out, and these are called divisions, the anterior and posterior divisions of each of the trunks. And what we have next is actually called chords. So these are the chords right here. There's 3 chords, and as you can probably tell, they have names. So the names are actually in relation to the axillary artery that also passes through this area. And they're named in relation to the axillary artery. So there is lateral, posterior, and medial. So medial runs medially to the axillary artery. Lateral runs laterally. So if you ever go to a cadaver lab and you find the axillary artery, you can tell which one of these chords is which based on their position to the axillary artery. So as we type over here, this one is actually the lateral. This one is posterior, so it runs posteriorly to the axillary artery. And this one is medial, so it runs medial to the axillary artery. Now, this is the fun part, because there's going to be a lot of colors going on here. So, what happens here is this lateral cord splits off into 2. This posterior cord splits off into 2. And this medial cord splits off into 2. So that can be like an easy way to identify what's going where. At the end, you're actually going to be ending up with 5 because one of the posterior branches and one of the lateral branches and one of the medial branches is going to fuse together to form one terminal branch. So let's get these colors out. Sorry, I'm just looking over here at my notes, just making sure I'm giving you all the right information. So if you ever see me glance over there, that's just me making sure I get the colors down and everything is all right. So let's go ahead. As you can imagine, there's always going to be a straight branch that comes off of these, so we can actually continue this red that way. We can continue the white that way, and we can continue this blue as well. Fun, fun, fun. So, as I said, one of the lateral chords actually divides down, so we can have a red here go all the way down here, and as well as the other colors. So this white also goes down here, and this blue also goes down here. Oh, running out of space. There we go. So that's actually one of them already done. The fun part is going to be here now. So this posterior chord, as you can see, there's actually these two from C5 and C6 that are running up, and these two actually separate into their own ones over here, as so. But they also split off and go straight like that. Let me draw that a little better. That goes straight like that. Just like that. And you can probably guess that these also go straight and meet up over here. Now, finally, we have the medial chord. So the medial chord, we can just continue with the straight line for these two. And as I mentioned before, it merges with one of the lateral chord's branches. So we can actually combine these two right here. All right, and there you go. Brachial plexus basically done. So you actually got the major ones done here. So these are called the terminal branches. There we go. So the terminal branches are going to be the final things that come off for the brachial plexus. This is technically the end of the brachial plexus. Anything that comes after this is just its own thing, and it has its own divisions. And now we'll actually label these terminal branches here. So this top one is the musculocutaneous. And the musculocutaneous actually innervates the coracobrachialis, the biceps brachii, and the brachialis. Okay? Now we have the axillary over here. Now the axillary actually innervates the deltoid and the teres minor. Teres minor, as you know, is part of the rotator cuff muscles. There's 4 in that series, and you can memorize it by the acronym SITS, S-I-T-S. There's supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapular, and those all contribute to the rotation of the shoulder joint. This big boy right here is the radial nerve. This one is the median nerve. And finally, we have the ulnar nerve. Oop, spelled that wrong. And I think I spelled musculocutaneous wrong. There we go. So those are the main terminal branches, and they go off into the arm and forearm to innervate all those muscles. So the radial nerve innervates the triceps brachii, the posterior extensor compartment muscles, so the muscles that are involved in extension. And the median nerve innervates the anterior flexor muscles, so the ones that are involved in flexion, except for the flexor carpi ulnaris and half of the flexor digitorum profundus, the ulnar half of it. That is innervated by the ulnar nerve, and those two. And as I said before, all these nerves actually go towards the wrist and arm, but there's a lot more muscles there, but that's not what I'll get into right now. And now you can actually tell where each of these nerves come from. So the musculocutaneous, you can see, comes from C5, C6, and C7. The axillary nerve comes from all of them. Just kidding, just C5 and C6. Testing you guys. The radial nerve is where all of them come from. You can see all 5 colors there. The median nerve also has the same situation. And finally, the ulnar nerve, which has the 2 lower ones, so that's C8 and T1. And as you can see, this is a really good way of figuring out where each of these terminal branches come from. And so if you have an injury at, let's say, T1, you're going to have problems in muscles that get innervated by the radial nerve, median nerve, and ulnar nerve. Likewise, if you get damage in C6, for example, these top 4 nerves are what's going to get damaged. So this is the entirety of the brachial plexus, the simplified way of showing where all the paths converge and diverge to get through each other's paths and innervate what they need to innervate. So what you really need to focus on is that these first 2 ventral rami merge, the last 2 ventral rami merge. This middle one doesn't really do anything until it reaches the divisions. This division, there's an anterior and posterior for every trunk that's created. So there's an anterior, posterior, anterior, posterior. This one's actually posterior right here, and that's anterior. And now the 3 chords are created. So there's 3 trunks and 3 chords. There's 5 ventral rami, but 5 terminal branches. And these chords turn into terminal branches via very fancy stuff here. The lateral splits off into 2, the posterior splits off into, the medial splits off into. So as you can see, there's actually 2 splits, and they both involve 2 splittings of each of their previous track of nerves. So the superior splits in 2, middle splits in 2, inferior splits in 2. Here, the lateral splits in 2, posterior split in 2, medial split in 2. So that's an easy way of making sure you know what's going on. It goes 5, 3, 2 splits, 3, 2 splits, 5. So it's kind of symmetrical in that aspect. A little bit. And that's basically it. So you could freeze frame it here. I will be exposing a little bit about the little branches that come off, but those aren't necessarily important to know about the entire structure of the brachial plexus. And voila, here's the entire brachial plexus with the major branching nerves that come off of them. And now these are just some of them. There's actually a lot more that come off of them, but these are the important ones. And you can see here there's a suprascapular on the superior trunk, the lateral pectoral, and the lateral cord. There's 3 on the posterior cord, thoracodorsal upper and lower subscapular, and the medial cord has 3 as well. The medial pectoral, which is opposite of the lateral pectoral. Easy to remember that way, upper and lower as well as easy to remember. And then these 2 are easy to remember as well. These are the brachial and antebrachial cutaneous nerve. Both of them are medial, and they're on the medial cord. And this funny one over here, my artistic skills are not the best, but this is actually the long thoracic. It originates from the C4 ventral ramus, and it picks up a little bit from the C5, a bit from the C6, and a bit from C7, and becomes a long thoracic. And the long thoracic actually goes to the serratus anterior right here. And all of the other ones, the names kind of tell you where they go. The thoracodorsal, for example, is the thorax of the back. Dorsal is back, so that actually goes to the latissimus dorsi, which is on the back. And other than that, you can pause right here, and you can actually try to test yourself, like where each of these originate from, because the colors actually correspond to where they're coming from. These branching ones are not as intuitive as the main ones, because some of them don't actually pick up some that came along the way. For example, the upper subscapular doesn't have any of C7, 8, or T1, and then this thoracodorsal actually doesn't have any from C8 and T1, even though it's like straight in the middle of the posterior cord. But that's just how it is. That's how nature designed it. You gotta love it, right? How complicated it is. And we have to memorize it for anatomy. If you see this on a cadaver, you can actually easily tell the rami because those are very distinct. You could tell the trunks because they merge very nicely and are still very thick. And what gets confusing is when the divisions come. But the divisions are actually not too bad because there's an M shape that comes, and that M shape is much more noticeable over here. There's this M right here. But I also like to see this M right here. If you can kind of tell, here's M like right there. So this is like the first M that I think about, and here is this like second M that I think about. And then there's these two branches for musculocutaneous and ulnar. So if you can identify these two M's on a cadaver, you can pretty easily tell what you're looking at, as well as the medial, posterior, and lateral cords. They all are referring to the position on the axillary artery. So if you can find the axillary artery, you can easily tell which is which over there. So please do feel free to pause and just like absorb, and as well as do this on your own using 5 different colors and going through and mapping where each of the nerves go to. It will really help, and I know it helps a lot for me, as this is like one of the big things that people are scared of coming into medical school. It's like the first thing they learn is the brachial plexus. Actually, we started on the back, but the next thing was brachial plexus. My point still stands that it's very useful to draw it out with 5 different colors and figure out where like everything is going to. With that, that's about it. Thanks for joining me on my brachial plexus journey, and I hope I'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.